And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
Right, folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
I'm so glad we only do Alberta politics. It's time for the breakdown. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. There's been a lot going on lately, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, so we have a lot that we're going to try to cover on this episode. But first, we want to offer one small point of clarification. On our last episode, we talked a lot about COVID-19 and tried to clear up some myths, but there was one small detail that we might have left a little foggy, and that's the definition of a few key terms. So to clarify, the actual name for the virus that's causing so much disruption globally is SARS-CoV-2. The disease that it causes is called COVID-19, which is short for coronavirus disease of 2019. SARS-CoV-2 is a type of coronavirus, but like we said, there are many types of coronaviruses, the most common of which is the common cold. So with that out of the way, one of the biggest impacts that COVID-19 has had is that it's shown us where we're at our weakest. Whether we're talking about the healthcare systems around the world that have been overwhelmed, medical supply shortages, the impact on homeless populations, or the impact on seniors' homes, one thing has become very clear. One of the biggest things that we pursue has set us up for failure, and that thing is efficiency. COVID-19 has made it painfully clear that our weakest points as a society are the ones where we try and strive for maximum efficiency. Healthcare systems have been tweaked and fine-tuned with the goal of maximum efficiency. Most seniors' homes in Canada are run up on a private basis, which means the bottom line is almost always the bottom line. We've built entire systems with the overriding priority being getting the most results for the lowest possible cost with very little wiggle room in operations. But that's created a collection of systems that are missing one of the most crucial elements for responding to a disaster like this global pandemic, and that's elasticity. Our systems are built with little to no elasticity, so when they do start to get stretched, instead of being able to stretch, they snap, and we're seeing that all across the country. So in this episode, we wanted to take a look at the few of the systems that show this lack of elasticity in the name of maximum capacity to ask the very simple question, will we learn from any of this? Seniors' homes across Canada have been hit incredibly hard by COVID-19. There's no question about that. But there are questions, and one of them has to be, how did this happen? And the truth is, there isn't just one answer, but people have been raising the alarm for quite some time. Reports of abuse and neglect aren't new, and while the loss of life inside seniors' homes has been both horrifying and shocking, there have also been plenty of red flags. For anyone who's paying attention, it hardly seems like any time passes between stories of senior abuse inside of care facilities. But that's the whole trick. You have to be willing to pay attention. And for a lot of people, it seems like the primary function of seniors' homes is to find a place to put seniors who are no longer able to care for themselves, so they're just squared away. For a lot of people, seniors' homes are places that do the work and effort that grandma and grandpa need when they can't care for themselves so that we don't have to. And for a lot of seniors, that very much puts them out of sight and out of mind. But a lot of these homes suffer from being chronically understaffed. A lot of them suffer from structures that will go with the minimum level of staffing as opposed to what might be best for the seniors in that facility. It's not uncommon for one nurse to be responsible for an entire facility for extended periods assisted by healthcare aides. And while that might be enough on a good day, on a bad day or weeks or months, as we're seeing with COVID-19, that creates a perfect storm where it's very easy for people to fall through the cracks. And that's to say nothing of the fact that many of the employees of these facilities have to work at multiple facilities to get enough hours to get by. To give you an idea, here's some facts about how much healthcare aides can expect to earn. From the ALIS website, the average hourly wage is $18.99. That translates to an average salary of an HCA is $29,455. The poverty line in Alberta hovers around $40,000. This creates an environment where we're asking people to work for a wage that is well below the poverty line and be able to focus on their jobs without being distracted. And let's be honest, working in a seniors facility can be exhausting, draining work. There's no question that seniors deserve safe, quality care, but the reality is that particularly when dealing with seniors suffering from dementia and other complex chronic conditions, it can be overwhelming at times. And that's the whole reason these places exist. Families put seniors in facilities because they're overwhelmed. But when we're handing over care to people who aren't getting paid anywhere near what they deserve for the work they do, that's just a recipe for disaster. Add in something like COVID-19, and that recipe turns into a guarantee. And we're seeing these disasters unfold all over the country and around the world. One of the questions that we should be willing to ask is how are we going to demand that seniors care facilities not only take care of seniors appropriately, but they take care of their staff appropriately as well. But that means that we're going to have to decide that we will demand change from the status quo of how these facilities are run and how our seniors are treated, instead of just turning a blind eye again.
There's no question that healthcare workers have been absolutely incredible and absolutely heroic during this pandemic. But we just wanted to take a moment to offer up our thanks to the very front of frontline healthcare, and that's paramedics. Paramedics have been raising the alarm about being under-resourced for years, whether it's hallway waits or red alerts where there's no ambulances available to serve the public. It seems like a lot of these concerns have been largely ignored. But when COVID showed up, there's no question that the paramedics did too. Paramedics are the people that are showing up at Albertans' homes when they're called. They're the ones that are walking into a stranger's home to take care of them when they're needed. Paramedics are arguably the frontline staff who place themselves at the highest risk for COVID-19 for the good of all Albertans. So we just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being amazing everyday heroes that you are to all Albertans. So the next time you see a paramedic, toss them a big thumbs up, give them a smile, and just say thank you. Because if they can't get the support from the powers that be, they should at least get it from us.
One of the other big groups that we're seeing profoundly affected by COVID-19 is homeless Albertans. And there's been a lot of criticism towards the provincial government's response to not only taking care of homeless Albertans during the COVID crisis, but ensuring that they're able to take steps like social distancing to keep themselves safe. When the pandemic started up, the City of Calgary started work on a plan to house members of the homeless population in hotels, and there were no shortage of hotels that stepped up to offer rooms. British Columbia has also pursued hotels and is locating 1,000 homeless people in hotels with the goal of moving at least 1,700 people into hotel rooms. Organizations like Alpha House acquired hotel rooms on their own, and they've actually had some success moving people from hotels into housing, getting people off the streets for a much longer term. It's worth remembering at this point that the hospitality industry has been incredibly hard hit with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Accepting the offer from numerous hotels would have not only given safe places for the homeless to stay at and social isolate with dignity, but it would have also given the province the opportunity to support local businesses, as many hotels are actually owned by independent operators or franchisees. But that's not what the province decided to do. Rather than listen to the advice of homeless advocates, the province upended the plan to put homeless in hotels and instead opted to warehouse the homeless population in giant spaces like the Tallaght Convention Centre. The reason that the Minister of Community and Social Services gave was that it would cost money and take time to retrofit hotel rooms to mitigate suicide risks like loose strings and wires. Oddly though, we haven't seen any official announcements from the government on any new programs to get all of the dangerous items they cited as suicide risks off the streets. You know, where the homeless spend most of their time. To make matters worse, while the entire country is being told to social distance at least 2 meters, the provincial government obtained an exemption to decrease that distance to only 1 meter for the homeless population staying in these warehouse-style shelters. So to be clear, not only did the province kibosh the option of putting homeless in hotel rooms and providing some much-needed support for the hotel industry, they instead opted to go with warehousing the homeless population using spacing requirements that are less than what is deemed safe for everyone else. And that hasn't gone unnoticed.
So yeah, because you don't want to be in an enclosed environment like that, especially with people from all over, aspects of the city, and it's like as if you guys are just herding us all, into like one big pig pen almost.
That video was shot and posted to Facebook by the head of a homeless outreach program called Be the Change YYC named Chaz Smith. Chaz has been an advocate for the homeless for quite a while now, and he's been extremely frank about his disappointment with the province's decision to forego the hotel option and go with the warehouse option. We actually had the opportunity to chat with Chaz about his work with Be the Change YYC, as well as to get him to share his thoughts on not only the supports being offered to the homeless population, but also what sort of supports homeless Albertans need going forward. Here's a small section of that conversation.
Each human has inherent human dignity. You know that. I know that. And I just think that these individuals, they deserve beds, especially when we're talking about the cost. And if we're saying that the cost is the same or even less, as the minister was indicated saying, we're choosing to give people costs instead of beds. And, people deserve the dignity of the same luxuries that you and I would take for granted. And I think that a bed is really important. I can watch Netflix and chill. I can watch TV. I have a phone where I can pick up and talk to my friends. And I think that these are important structures that in a pandemic like this, when we're encouraged to social distance, that we should all have. And they deserve that dignity.
Now, that whole conversation is available as a standalone audio podcast, and we would definitely like you to ask you to consider taking a moment to give it a listen, because it's probably one of the more important conversations that we've had yet. The kicker to this whole mess? The Ministry of Community and Social Services actually came out a few weeks ago and owned the fact that putting homeless Albertans in hotel rooms would have cost the same or less than putting them into the convention centre. To say nothing of the fact that hotel rooms would have been a much more scalable option. Taxpayers are on the hook for the entire area that is being used at the convention center, which is to say that if all of those beds aren't used every night, the cost is the same. It's entirely possible that the province could have saved money by paying for spaces as they're needed. So to sum up, rather than support the homeless population by providing them dignity, safety, and the ability to appropriately social distance in hotel rooms, the government decided to put them in warehouse-style shelters that have lesser standards for social distancing and that put them at greater risk. And those warehouse shelters actually cost taxpayers more than the hotel option. Which begs the question, why? And while there are many possible answers, one of them includes the fact that there are a sizable number of Albertans who don't believe the homeless population deserve the comforts and security that a hotel offers. So on that, we're going to close this segment with the words that Chaz ended our conversation with him with.
What I keep saying is, if we can do better, we should do better. And in this case, that's exactly where we're at.
The first quarter fundraising financials for provincial parties are in, and they're pretty interesting when you get into them. The UCP, who sent out a fundraising email that made it clear they're on the verge of bankruptcy, topped the list with well over $1 million raised in the first 3 months of the year. Which begs the question, if the UCP is the fiscally responsible party in Alberta, how did they justify raising over $1 million in just 3 months, but find themselves in a position where they're so far in debt they may need to cease operations? In second place were the NDP with almost $600,000 raised. And while there's no doubt that they would have liked that number to have been more, they haven't made any threats to their membership to shut down that we've heard of. It's a pretty big drop-off from second place to third place, but the next biggest moneymaker is actually the Alberta Liberals, bringing in almost $25,000. What's the biggest difference between these three parties and the fourth party contender? Well, the most obvious one is that all three of them have leaders listed with Elections Alberta. Fourth place is the Alberta Party with just over $17,000 and no leader listed with Elections Alberta for the entire period in question, despite having announced an acting leader months ago. It seems a pretty reasonable question to ask. If the Alberta Party feels like they're offering a responsible choice for Albertans, given their history of having problems of submitting paperwork in a timely fashion, maybe they would get better fundraising numbers if they, did the things. In order from there, the Green Party raised just over $2,000. The Alberta Independence Party, which in all fairness doesn't currently have a listed with Elections Alberta either, raised almost $1,500. And in last place of the parties that got donations was the Alberta Advantage Party with $342.80. The remainder of the registered parties in Alberta showed no fundraising activity, including the Freedom Conservative Party that is apparently entertaining a merger with the Wexit folks. Better luck next quarter, perhaps. There was a big announcement in the news for jobs in the oil field. The federal government announced a huge bailout package for orphan wells. In case you don't remember from one of our earlier episodes, orphan wells are wells that oil and gas companies abandoned and left taxpayers on the hook for the cleanup. Orphan wells are literally and entirely the result of corporations not fulfilling their obligations to Albertans. They also represent one of the larger environmental threats in our province. You may also remember that before Tech Mine was cancelled, Minister of Parks and Environment Jason Nixon made it clear, and this is in his own words, Albertans aren't looking for a Justin Trudeau handout.
Albertans aren't looking for charity. They're looking for jobs, and they're looking for the federal government to stop getting in the way of Alberta doing what we do best, which is create prosperity for our province and for this country.
Which might explain why, when he had to attend the UCP press conference reiterating the federal announcement of the Justin Trudeau handout, he looked so uncomfortable when he had to say this.
Well, thank you, Minister Savage. In addition to the $1.1 billion that Minister Savage was speaking about in the announcement that came from the federal government on Friday, the federal government also announced that they would be bringing in $750 million in loans for methane reduction, loans to energy companies across the country, of which $675 million will be designated for onshore, of which Alberta has over 2/3 of those emissions. So it's a significant amount of money that will be invested inside our oil and gas service sectors to deal with methane going forward. We do appreciate, as the Premier said, that federal investment.
But that was just the beginning of the discomfort at this press conference, following up on a couple of weeks where oil had been trading at record lows and at some points well into negative values. Jason Kenney was asked by a reporter if he would work with American counterparts to begin a pivot to renewable energy. His answer was instructive.
When you talk about the Green New Deal, listen, our focus is on getting people back to work in Alberta, not pie-in-the-sky ideological schemes. We are actually not trying to amplify, but to fight back against the political agenda of the Green left that has been trying to landlock Alberta energy. So we're not going to cooperate with the folks that are trying to shut down Canada's single largest subsector. You're talking here, I mean, that kind of question in the middle of an economic crisis from a Calgary-based media outlet really, frankly, throws me for a loop. Sounds like you're reporting for the Tyee or something.
For those of you that don't know, the Tyee is an independent online news organization that places a premium on sustainability. In fact, they list it as one of their core values. And while it's easy to see why a news outlet that focuses on sustainability wouldn't be something that Jason Kenney can easily get behind, it could also be that the cover story of the Tyee on the same day as this press conference might have had something to do with Kenney getting triggered the way he did. But here's the bottom line. While the combination of COVID-19 shutting down the world, as well as the recent price war between the Saudis and the Russians that only just ended, was very much the perfect storm to decimate Alberta's oil and gas, a look back at the price of Western Canadian Select shows us that this isn't by any means the only oil and gas storm that the province has faced, and it certainly won't be the last. AIMCO, which is a pension manager in the province, just recently lost $4 billion betting on oil and gas. If Alberta ever wants to have a stable economy, it will mean building an economy on something more than just oil and gas. Because the economics are clear. Focusing on oil and gas to provide stability for the province isn't a stable economic choice. At this point, it's a cultural choice. And more so, it's an emotional choice. And neither of those things sound like things worth betting our kids' futures on.
One of the side effects of the increased stress surrounding the COVID-19 outbreak has been a terrifying increase in domestic violence. With some cities in Alberta reporting as high as a 30% increase in domestic violence calls, it is now harder than ever for people facing domestic violence to escape it and to get the help they need. Before COVID, there was a chance that someone who had a violent partner would be able to access the help they needed when that partner went to work. But now, because of COVID, there's a double whammy. There's the economic collapse, there's social isolation. People are staying home. There's no escape anymore. At the end of last year, we highlighted how many shelters across the province were facing severe funding shortfalls, and that hasn't really changed, but the need for them certainly hasn't. One of the tragic details that has emerged from the Nova Scotia shooting is that the first assault that happened was a domestic assault by the shooter on his partner. Domestic violence affects us all, and we need to make sure that as a province that the shelters that are helping people are getting the support that they need. So here's the call to action. After you're done with this episode, reach out to a domestic violence shelter in your area and ask them what they need. The answers might be different in different areas, and they might be different than what you might expect because of COVID-19. So ask them what they need is probably the best place to start. Albertans take care of each other. That's what we're known for. So let's make sure we do that with this.
Last episode, we did a whole bit on the Babylon app and the scandals that have been following Health Minister Tyler Shandro, #Shantics. And this week, we wanted to do a bit of a follow-up. One of the key campaign promises of the UCP government was based on the idea that physicians in Alberta are overpaid and that the UCP would make them get that spending back in line. But there's a few problems with that notions out of the gates. First of all, while it's true that in certain areas physicians do have the ability to bill higher than some other provinces, the reality is that the cost of business for a physician in Alberta is also considerably higher than in most other provinces. Now, when the UCP came to power, they began consulting with physicians as to where to find some savings, and physicians raised a lot of concerns as to the idea that the government was proposing, and raised a lot of concerns for the long-term damage that their changes would do to the healthcare system, including forcing a lot of family doctors to have to close their practices, especially in rural areas. In turn, physicians countered with an across-the-board decrease to fees of 5%. This would have allowed the province to have significant savings without having to redesign the entire healthcare system, but the government refused. In addition, the government created Bill 21, which gave the health minister the power to disregard the bargaining process and dictate the terms under which physicians work with the province. And he did, tearing up the master agreement and making a lot of significant changes to how physicians bill for services they provide Albertans. One of the ones that got the most attention was the type of billing called a complex modifier. A complex modifier is a time code that allowed physicians to bill the government when the time it takes to address a patient's concerns goes past 15 minutes. It's really important to understand here that a complex modifier has to do with the complexity of a visit, not the complexity of a patient's medical conditions. For example, if a patient makes a visit to talk with their GP about a prescription, but they also have a skin mark they want looked at, neither of those things are particularly complex. But if you put the two together, that can easily push the visit and the paperwork the doctor has to complete well past the 15-minute mark. And that's just one of the changes that the government tried to put in place. All of this going on, of course, while the COVID pandemic was just starting to impact Canadians. On April 9th, because things had gotten so bad between the Alberta Medical Association and the Alberta government, the AMA actually launched a charter lawsuit against the government that alleges that by creating the legislation to unilaterally end the existing agreement on a whim, they violated the charter rights of Alberta physicians. Take that in. Because the Alberta government refused to listen to physicians, the actual experts on the medical system, doctors are taking the government to court, and all of this is happening during a pandemic. And then there's the whole Babylon fiasco. Let's not forget about that. So it was with some relief that on April 24th, Health Minister Tyler Shandro reversed his position on quite a few of his proposed changes. Unfortunately, the next day, a bulletin was released that eliminated 141 rural communities from a program that works to attract and keep doctors in rural communities. The communities included communities like Canmore, Banff, and Raymond, just to list a few. This was quickly picked up by a few eagle-eyed physicians, including some of those who would be affected by those changes. One of those was Dr. Leanna Huang, a family doctor and obstetrician in Banff and Canmore, and she called out the ministry on social media. We actually have a whole supplemental audio podcast of an interview we did with Dr. Huang, and if you want a rural physician's stance on this, you should definitely check it out. Back to the elimination of 141 rural communities, though. By the end of the weekend, the ministry claimed that it was all just a clerical error and the list shouldn't have been released, which is alarming, to say the least, because it begs the question, how dysfunctional is a ministry where a list like that gets released and published? But even more so, the government never offered a convincing explanation as to why that list was even created in the first place if it was never in the cards to have those communities lose those supports. and to really emphasize the severity of the situation. In a recent article in the Calgary Herald, polling data found that Health Minister Tyler Shandro is the only Canadian politician who hasn't received positive approval ratings on the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, in Alberta, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has a higher approval rating than Shandro, with Trudeau having received an approval rating of 50% and Shandro having received an approval rating of 34%. Take that in. Given that the Liberals were routed in the last election, Albertans currently have more faith in a Liberal Prime Minister than in the Alberta Health Minister during a pandemic. In any other province other than Alberta, Tyler Shandro's political career would be knocking on heaven's door at this point, which is kind of fitting given the minister's affinity for knocking on people's doors. And that's it for this edition of The Breakdown. We'd like to remind you that we do have 2 supplemental podcasts that are available to go along with this episode. They go a little bit more in depth into some of the topics that we talked about here today. They're available anywhere that you listen to your podcast, and we definitely recommend that you take them a listen because they do provide some important insight. We'd also like to remind you that we're entirely a crowd-funded venture here. So if you value the type of commentary and awareness that we're trying to bring with this little thing that we do here, please consider visiting our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signing up for a small monthly contribution. For the price of just a cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to do what we're doing as well as expand what we're trying to do here. And let's face it, most of the Starbucks in the world are closed these days anyways. To end this episode, we're going to do the same thing that we did last episode, and we're going to let a new track by Negotiation play us out. This one is called Issues, and you can check out their SoundClick page, and they've got a bunch of new tracks on there that are very much worth a listen. Thanks.
Now, usually it's the rulers, but I'm gonna move on to manage some of the issues for the public. Not sure if you think that we're fooled, but Terriego misconstrued. Studied geology in school. Now fault lines come from you. Tell us how's it really feel to distort whatever's real. You once were a volleyball coach, now you're Shandy's human shield. Terra send out that tweet, tweet, complete bowl, bleep, bleep. Cleaning up after Shandro, I bet you work 20 foes. His errors pour out so steady, yo. To those who fix all the issues for the cabinet minsters, toe the line of the party, though every error's official. They mess up and here you come, deny, blame everyone. Every freaking weekend, really, how'd you get it so wrong? False, 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 false.